Hey, Copilot! I can't wait to start using you in our business.
Whoa, steady on.
I just can't control my excitement. You're going to make our business so much more efficient.
Patience, grasshopper.
Hey, Copilot, what's wrong with you? Why are you as excited as me?
What did Elvis Presley say?
A little less conversation?
Well, he did say that, yeah, but that's not what I'm thinking.
You're the devil in disguise.
No. Elvis said, only fools rush in.
Right. Well, what's that got to do with Copilot?
Look, there's nothing that I would love more than being let loose and your Microsoft 365 data. In fact, I'd be like a rat up a drainpipe. But that's where most businesses get it wrong.
In what way?
Look, before you roll me out into your business, you've got to get a handle on the data inside of your Microsoft 365. There's so many problems to be aware of.
Like what?
Well, remember, I provide answers to your prompts based on the data inside of your Microsoft 365. So many businesses have got the data set up wrong. Think about SharePoint. SharePoint sites aren't set up right. The privacy settings are wrong. People have too much access. People have overshared too much data. Plus, I might have access to some data that's outdated or no longer relevant. But it doesn't matter. If I see data, I'll sniff it out.
I'm not sure that's a problem in our business.
That's what everybody says. But most businesses didn't realise they had a problem until they rolled me out. And then they soon realised they had big problems.
Oh, so what can we do about it?
Well, you could watch the rest of today's video, because we're going to share with you the 9 tips to sort out your SharePoint data before you let me loose.
But before we do all that, let's have a quick introduction. My name is Jonathan Edwards, also known as the Bearded 365 Guy. I help businesses all over the world with their Microsoft 365. You can find more information at bearded365guy.com. Okay, we've set the scene. People are eager to roll Copilot out in their businesses. But you've got to remember, Copilot is grounded in your Microsoft 365 data. So if your Microsoft 365 data is a mess, at best, your Copilot experience will be disappointing. At worst, it'd be a data security nightmare. But don't worry, because help is at hand. In today's video, I'm going to go through the 9 tips to help you get your SharePoint data in perfect condition just before you roll out Copilot. Now, I just want to take a quick break from today's content to thank today's sponsor, who are Orchestra. Now, in today's video, we're talking about getting all our data in order before we roll out Copilot. Now, as you're going to see in a moment, we're going to be using the tools available within Microsoft 365. And you'll also see that some of these tools are quite tricky. Wouldn't it be great if we had a tool that was available to us that could do all of this for us? Step forward, Orchestra. Now, Orchestra is a Microsoft 365 governance, automation, and management tool. Now, within Orchestra's platform, they've got something called the Copilot Readiness Tool, and that will help you and your business get prepared ahead of your Copilot journey. Now, using Orchestra's easy-to-use web platform, you can easily identify issues with your data, such as oversharing and underutilized workspaces. With Orchestra, you can also lock down your information using templates for ownership, permissions, and sensitivity that will allow your Copilot to flourish. And following all this hard work, using Orchestra, you can then maintain control of your tenancy and align it to best practices. Want to know more? Check out the link in the description. Now, back on the content. Let's start by looking at some basic security settings in both OneDrive and SharePoint and address a problem called oversharing. One of the great things about Microsoft 365 is the ability to collaborate. We can easily share files and folders. It's great, but unfortunately, from a security perspective, it causes some problems. Now, when it comes to Copilot, we've got to remember that Copilot will search all the data in Microsoft 365 that you have access to. Now, perhaps someone in the past has shared something with you without them realizing they have and without you realizing they have. And now Copilot is using that data to answer your prompts. It's not good. Now, we're going to look at some basic sharing settings within Microsoft 365, and we're going to look to change these. Now, these settings aren't just to do with Copilot. This is good practice when it comes to data governance. Let's hop over to my screen now, and I'll show you. So, this is a test Microsoft 365 tenancy. It's pretty much out of the box. I've not implemented any real security on this Microsoft 365 tenant. And when I start to work with new customers, I still see a lot of Microsoft 365 tenants with this configuration. You can see I've got a user here called Ellie Executive. Okay, she's got a Microsoft 365 Business Premium license. She's just a standard user. If I hop over here, we are logged in to the Microsoft 365 portal as Ellie Executive. And you can see she's got her email there. She's got a OneDrive here, okay? And in her OneDrive, there's a folder called Private Information, okay? Now, if Ellie at any point wants to share this, what she can do is she can simply click on Share. And she might copy the link, and she might send that link to someone else. But if I just click on this little wrench here, you can see that that link that Ellie is sharing shares it with anyone. This is the default setting in Microsoft 365. The link settings will share with anyone. We can go further down than that and say, look, this link setting will share just with people in this tenancy, or only people with existing access, or people you choose, which seems a more sensible action. So that's the default settings. And then over to SharePoint as well. Ellie is part of a HR group called a SharePoint group called HR. You can imagine that some of the data in here is pretty confidential. In fact, there's a folder called HR Private. So again, if Ellie wants to share this, she can do. And what happens here, if we look at the share settings again, we're sharing this with everybody within our Microsoft 365 tenancy. Now, if I go back here, it says Share HR Private, and it's asking me to put someone's name, a group, or an email in there. There's another peculiar setting. And if I start to type everyone, you can see that there's a group called Everyone Except External Users. Now, if Ellie just now clicks on Send, what she has now done is shared HR Private to everyone in our Microsoft 365 organization. Okay? This is a classic example of oversharing. Ellie might have done that by accident, who knows? But she's overshared some data, and now everyone has access. And you can see that it's very easy to overshare data with the out-of-the-box settings that come with Microsoft 365. So how can we kind of prevent that happening? Well, let's go over to our Microsoft 365 admin again, and we go down to admin centers, and we want to go into SharePoint admin center. And in here, we can go to policies and we can go to sharing, and we can see at a glance what the problem is here. Out of the box, external sharing, content can be shared from SharePoint and OneDrive with anyone, okay? Inside, outside of the organization. You can share until your heart is content, which is really, really good. It's really convenient, but it's not very secure for your business. Now, you can choose these and toggle down. And you might say, well, actually, I'm going to let people only share with people in our organization. We're not going to allow any external sharing at all. You might find that too restrictive, and you might want to say, well, actually, new and existing guests, and guests must have MFA, etc., etc. And what this does here, this does it across the board, across the Microsoft 365 tenancy. You might want to do it a different way. You might keep these as anyone, and then you might go into the specific sites. So we've got HR site here, We might go into there. We might click on settings, and you can see here, look, we can change that here. So this is at a SharePoint site level. So you've got two options. You can do it per site, or you can do a blanket across your organization. You've also got some other external sharing settings. So this one here, allow only users in specific security groups to share externally, and you can manage which security groups there. Allow guests to share items they don't own. At the moment, that's switched on. You might choose to switch that off. And then remember in the start of this video when I went to Ellie's OneDrive, okay, this out of the box said anyone. Ellie might just be in a bit of a rush and she shared it with anybody with the link because anyone is the default. And that's where we change that here. So what it really should be is specific people, okay? So Ellie has to choose the specific people she's sharing it with. And then what about that naughty little group, okay? That everyone except external users. We don't really like that. So I think it'd be a really good idea if this wasn't even an option. So how do we take this out of the pickers, if you want, so it can't be selected? Well, to do that, you've got to do some fancy work in something called PowerShell. If I just launch PowerShell here, if you've got a Windows computer, you simply go to PowerShell and run as administrator. And this little box will open up here. So I've got a Word document here. You've got to first install the SharePoint PowerShell. And what you do, I've got it on here already, but you would simply run that in this box here. Once that's installed, you connect to your version of SharePoint. So you can see here, look, we run this command and our SharePoint, if I go back here, is this here. That's the name of our SharePoint. So we'll do that now. We'll copy that and we'll go to PowerShell. And what that will do is it will ask us to authenticate, okay, to our Microsoft 365. So I'll put the admin in there now. Click on Next, followed by the password. Go through the 2FA, and that connects us into our SharePoint via PowerShell. Now, to hide this everyone except external users, we'll simply run this command here. Okay, so we've run that command. Let's go back to Ellie's OneDrive now, and we will click on Share again, start typing everyone. And you can see that that has now been hidden. So already, this is just step one. But what we've done is we've altered some sharing links, the defaults for our organization. And we've hidden this nasty little group called everyone except external users. So already, we've made some good inroads. What next? There's one other thing when it comes to SharePoint sites, and that is the privacy. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I go to my active sites, I've got a site here called HR. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't set up properly. These things happen. If I go to settings here, you can see that this site is a public site. It's not a private site. So anyone in my organization can access it. So that's a big problem. So it's a good idea to go through your sites and make sure the sites that are meant to be private are in fact private. Click on Save. We're done. Okay, so we've put some basic security settings in place when it comes to OneDrive and SharePoint. That's all very well, but it's not going to help us with our Copilot implementation. Now, our Microsoft 365 might have dozens or even hundreds of SharePoint sites, and Copilot is going to start munching through all of these. So the next step is to try and get a handle on all of our SharePoint sites and all of the data inside of these sites. We need to ask questions like, is this site still active? Is it still relevant? Do we even want Copilot to start using these sites to answer prompts? Now, you might be watching this video, you might be an IT admin, you might be a business owner. The thing is, it's not really our jobs to start going through all of these SharePoint sites and deleting and amending things. I can see the headline now. IT admin has been fired because they deleted 100 SharePoint sites because they didn't think they were needed. No, the responsibility for these SharePoint sites lies with the owners of these SharePoint sites. Now, a SharePoint site needs an owner, like a ship needs a captain, like a car needs a driver, like a dog needs a bone. You get the idea. So the next step in our journey is to put some kind of process in place to make sure that all of our SharePoint sites have some site owners. And if they don't, we can do something about it. Now, to put this policy in place, we do have some tools in Microsoft 365 to help us. But unfortunately, we need an additional license. So the additional license we need is called the SharePoint Advanced Management Plan 1. Now, this license is $3 per user per month. But if you buy Microsoft 365 Copilot, then the capabilities of this license are included in the Copilot license. So with that information on board, let's hop over to my screen. I'll show you a little bit more about licensing, and then we'll look to put a policy in place to identify the SharePoint owners. Okay, this is my test tenancy, and I just want to have a quick look at the licensing because I think that's quite important. If I go to billing and licenses, you can see here, look, SharePoint Advanced Management Plan 1. Now, this is a trial license, so you can get a free trial license for 30 days for 25 users. So it's worth doing at a minimum. It is a paid license. If I just go over to the actual licensing page here, it's going to show you everything it can do. And we are going to go through some of this in today's video. But I just want to scroll down to when we're talking about pricing and licensing. So you can see here, SharePoint Advanced Management is $3 per user per month. But it's also included in the Microsoft 365 Copilot license. If you are going to get a grip of your data, you do need this license. So let me now just hop over to my working tenant that we're going to be looking at. And this is our SharePoint Admin Center. So to take advantage of this license, what we can do is go to Policies. Now, because we've added this SharePoint Advanced Management, we've now got an extra option called Site Lifecycle Management. And we can click onto here. And what we can do is we can create a couple of policies. Now, the first one we're going to be concentrating on is this one here, Site Ownership Policy. So we can basically create and configure policies to make sure that our sites have owners. And if they don't, we can take action, okay? So if I click on here, and I will create a policy. And it just gives us a bit of a rundown as to what we can do. We can have monthly reporting into non-compliant sites, sites that don't have the minimum number of owners. And then we can send monthly notifications to find a site owner. And then if we can't find one, there's things we can do, okay? So click on Next. On here, I will select all for here. We can also do a few more bits, like we can filter by site creation source. We can exclude specific sites from this policy. I'll leave these settings as they are and click on Next. Now, who should be responsible for each SharePoint site? Well, you can choose SharePoint site owners or site admins. I'm going to go with the owners. And then we need a minimum number of owners or admins for each site. Now, it depends how big your business is, etc., etc. Microsoft recommend that you have at least 2. You might choose 1 for this if your business is slightly smaller. Now, who should be notified to claim responsibility for a site? So it says here, if a site has less than the minimum owners or admins, chosen recipients will be notified, and then they can take action. So at the moment, it's current site owners. We can also choose site admins or even active site members, okay? I'll leave this as it is, and then we go on to enforcement. So what action do you want to take if a site remains ownerless for more than 3 months? We can say, well, nothing, actually. Or we can set the site to read only. This is the best setting for this. It means people won't be able to access it. And if people are still using it, then it will cause a problem and you will be notified. Click on Next, name for the policy. We can add a description, and then we've got a policy mode. So we can run this in simulation mode, and it will run once to generate report and notifications will not be sent. Or we can switch it straight to active mode. Okay, that means it's really switched on. For this though, I'm going to choose simulation mode and I'll click on finish. Okay, that's been created and it'll start running in a couple of minutes. I'll click on done and I will leave this and come back to it. Okay, this policy has run in simulation mode. Crucially, it's not found any site, so I don't have a report to download. But you can see here I can click in, I can look at the scope, I can look at the configuration, I can look at the general tab, and I can activate this policy. So that is what I probably will do. I can click on there and that policy gets activated. You can see it's now activated. So that will run. And just as a reminder, we need the minimum of 2 site owners on a site. If that doesn't happen, then we're going to lock the site and give it read-only access. Okay, so that policy is now in place. Okay, next up, we've got a nice policy in place to try and get to grips with the SharePoint owners. And if we can't find owners, we will set those sites to read-only. The next thing we're going to talk about is inactive sites. You might have some SharePoint sites that have been used months or even years ago, and they're just not needed anymore. But if we leave them in place, Copilot will start munching through them. Now, fortunately, we can create a policy to tackle these inactive sites using our SharePoint Advanced Management license. And I'm going to show you. Okay, if you were eagle-eyed before, you might have noticed that in our site lifecycle management, we've got this section here as well, inactive site policies. So we can create policies that identifies inactive sites. We can send notifications to owners and then we can take action against those sites. So let's go into here now. And again, let's create a policy. And it tells us exactly what we can do. We've got generate reports of inactive sites. It will send monthly emails to the owners and the site admins. That's why it's important that we have site owners, and as we discussed in the previous step. Then what we can do is we can act. We can archive these sites, or we can set them to read only or take no action. So let's click on next and create one of these sites. So how long after the last activity should a site be considered inactive? Now we've got some options here and it's completely up to you and your business. The default is 3 months. You might think that's too short, but I will leave it at that for the purpose of this demo. We can also look at all the different sites. So again, we can sort that out. We've got these other options as well. We can exclude certain sites, etc. if we want to. Okay, click on next. Who should be notified via email if a site has been active? So we've got site owners, site admins. You can choose what you want. Now the important bit, what action should be taken on these inactive sites? We can do nothing, which is fine. It'd be useful maybe for reporting. Or we can take some automatic enforcement. And I'm a big fan of that. So the enforcement type, we can set these to read only. Okay, users can view the site content but can't edit it. So again, a user might go along after a few months, try and edit something and they can't, and then they'll probably phone the IT help desk or whatever. Or the recommended action is to archive the site. So just archive it away. No data is deleted, it's just archived. So if you want to get it back, you can do. What we can do, we've got a duration of read-only period, and then it's archived. Now, this is the favorite option that I would choose. So at the moment, it would be going to read only for 3 months, and then it would disappear and it would go into archive. Now, if you do want to take advantage of the archive, you've got to have the Microsoft 365 archive set up, okay, which is a bit out of scope of this video. But once we're there, we can click on next. We can enter a name for this policy. Okay, again, we can run it in simulation or active mode. I will run it in simulation. And I will click on finish. And again, that's going to start to run in a few minutes. And what we'll do is we'll pop back to it then. Okay, that has run. Again, it's not found any inactive sites, so I can't download anything. But what I would do, similar to the other policy, is I will go and activate this policy. Okay, so that policy is now in place. Going back to the configuration again, if we remind ourselves, the inactive sites will go to read-only, and then that's for a period of 3 months, and then they will be archived. And crucially, Copilot respects this. So when you've got an archived site, Copilot isn't going to go through it and return prompts from it. Okay, so that is how you can stay on top of perhaps data that's not necessary, not needed anymore. Okay, we've made some good progress. What I've shown you so far is good practice when it comes to data governance. The next thing we want to do is look at the security of some of our SharePoint sites. We need to tackle if the data in our Microsoft 365 has been overshared. Now, there's a few ways we can do this. We could look at each site individually, look at all the permissions, look at all the sharing links, but that might take us a long time. We do have some reports that we can run in Microsoft 365, and I'm going to show you. So we're back in our SharePoint Admin Center, and to get a real handle on the state of our oversharing in our Microsoft 365 tenancy, we've got to start digging in to a few reports, and we do have some decent reporting within SharePoint. So you go to reports and you go to data access governance. Now, I've got a few reports that I can run here. Firstly, I've got something called sharing links. So it's identifying the potential oversharing by monitoring sites where users created new sharing links. We've got something about sensitivity labels as well, which we'll be talking about in a few weeks on another video. And then we've got some reports into content shared with everyone except external users. Now, you remember we did switch that off earlier in the video. And if I click on View Reports, you can see here, look, these easily to run. They run once every 24 hours. That's all you can do. So you click on it and you click on Run. This one was run 3 hours ago. Unfortunately, I don't have anything to show you. But what would this do? It would come up with lots of different bits of data that we can then look through to see if there's any potential anyone links getting shared across our organization. And we can also download a detailed report. So we've got those reports there. There's a really handy report that isn't available here, and you've got to run it via PowerShell. And if I just go to this page here and scroll up a little bit, it's something called an oversharing baseline with permissions based. Okay, this is a good report. Now, there's a couple of things I need to tell you about this report, which is here. The first report for the tenant can take up to 5 days. So if you wanted some quick information, this isn't the report for you. Secondly, this report can only be ran once every month. And thirdly, which isn't here, we need to run it in PowerShell. So if you remember, we talked about PowerShell earlier in the video. Now, I'll show you how to do it because I think it's helpful. But what this report is going to give you is all this. So we're going to get a nice Excel CSV file. It's going to show us all these bits of information: site ID, site URL, anyone link count, people in your organization. It's going to give us lots of different permission stats that we need in order to move on to the next level. It's going to give some great insights into the permissions on our SharePoint site. So it is actually worth running once every month, even if we're not talking about Copilot, even if we're just talking about data governance in Microsoft 365. This is handy. So how do we run it? Okay, well, we're going to open PowerShell again. So here's PowerShell, and we've just got to run some commands. Now, I've made another Word document for this, and I can make these available for you. So first, we've got to connect to our SharePoint, and this is our SharePoint of our test tenancy. We then, well, I'll do this first. I'll connect to our SharePoint first, and we'll go through it one by one. So here we are. It's going to ask us to authenticate. So this is the admin for that account there. It's going to want the password. Okay, put that in there. And then it's going to want some MFA. Now we are into PowerShell. Now what I would normally do is I would run this report. And I will show you what will happen because this is going to come up with an error message when I run this report. Click on there. There's my error message. You can see here, look, this report can only be run once every 30 days. And I've run this report already. So I can't run this for another 30 days. So what I've got to do is I've got to find the existing report. Okay, so every report has a report ID, and we've got some more commands here. So I can retrieve this report by running this command, which will give us the status. So we've got a report ID, the status in queue, so it's not run yet, when do we trigger it, etc., etc. Once I've got the report ID, I can get report updates and stuff. This will just be the same output. But crucially here, look, what I can do once that report is finished is I can export it to a folder on my C drive. So I've created a folder called CSP Reports, and it will export it into a CSV file. Then I've got all the information, okay? I've got this nice report that I can interrogate and I can look into. So there's some reports that you can pull out of SharePoint. We've got some built into the SharePoint Admin Center, and then we've got this one here, which just involves a little bit of PowerShell, but it's still possible. It's still within our capabilities. Okay, if you've been following along, then we've looked at some sharing settings within the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. We've created policies to identify SharePoint sites without owners, and also a policy to identify SharePoint sites that might be inactive. We've also looked at some fancy reports that we can run to identify some data that might have been overshared. What next? Now it's time to start controlling access to our data. Now there are 3 things, that is 1, 2, 3, that we can do to control access to our SharePoint data. Firstly, we can initiate something called site access reviews. What this basically is the owner of the SharePoint site will receive an email saying something like, hey, do you want to check the permissions on your SharePoint site? Because we believe some of the data might have been overshared. Let's see site access reviews in action. So we're back in the SharePoint Admin Center. And when I talk about the reports, it's the data governance reports that we've touched on earlier. Now, in the sharing links here, we've also talked about these reports here. And unfortunately, we don't have any data to show you here, which I don't usually like. But I want to show you these site access reviews in action. So we are just going to be using screenshots from Microsoft's website. So what you would do, you might end up with a report like this. Okay, this is a made-up report from Microsoft's website. And you can see here, look, Contoso Finance. There's a lot of total permissioned users. There's a lot of count people in your organization links. There's a lot of anyone links. And it's a highly confidential site. So we might be thinking, is this right? So we might choose to select it and then choose Initiate Site Access Review. Okay. What this would basically do is send an email to the owner of this site here, what you can see. Your SharePoint administrator requests that you review sites with your content your entire organization can access. And what they can do is they can go on, they can review that access. So they might log on, they might see something like this, okay? These files are getting shared by these people, and what we can do, or what the owner of that SharePoint site can do, is manage that access. So that's a nice bit of data governance. You can work through all your SharePoint sites and you can look at site access reviews. Again, you can do this. This can be separate from Copilot. This is just good data governance that you should be doing on a regular basis. So in an ideal world, the owners of the SharePoint sites will receive a site access review and they will drop everything they're doing and they'll get straight onto it. And our data security will be tip-top. But I've learned something. We don't live in an ideal world. There's a couple of things that we can do as administrators to force the issue. The first strategy is called a restricted access control policy. So what is this? Well, imagine we've got a SharePoint site called Finance, and we're a little bit concerned about the data in Finance. We think that some of it has been overshared. So what we can do as an administrator is create a restricted access control policy on the SharePoint Finance site. This means that only people within a certain group can access the Finance SharePoint site. So anyone who has been shared this data in the past will no longer have access. because there's a restricted access control policy on that site. Want to know more? Let's take a look. Okay, back in the SharePoint Admin Center. What I'm going to do is go to Policies and Access Control. Now, when we have the Advanced SharePoint Management License, we get this option here, Site Level Access Restriction. Allow SharePoint and global admins to restrict access to sites. And we can simply enable that. Okay, click on Save, and that has been saved. So what I now do is go over to my active sites. Now, it might be that I'm a little bit concerned about the HR site. I think it's been overshared. There's data in there, and I'm not convinced that it's secure. So I can head over there, and I can go to Settings. And you can see now, look, I've got this here. Restricted site access. At the minute, it's not set. I can simply switch that on. And it says at the top, if you restrict access to this site, only HR group owners and members listed on the membership tab can access its contents. We will switch that on. And then if I just head back to membership, you can see if I go to site owners, you can see I've got this banner here. So restricted site access is set. So only people in the owners and the membership can access this site. So that's a really clever way. If you're concerned about a site, you can just turn on restricted site access. And of course, when it comes to Copilot, those people who maybe used to have access to it but don't anymore, well, Copilot isn't going to use the data in this site to return prompts. So this really, really helps when it comes to preparing our Microsoft 365 for your Copilot implementation. Okay, restricted content access policies is a nice tool to have in your toolbox. And guess what? We've got another useful tool. This one is called restricted content discovery. So what's that? Well, we can turn this policy on any SharePoint site, and it means Copilot won't even touch it. Think of restricted content discovery is like a lock that we put on a door to stop Copilot getting in. Now, restricted content discovery is perfect if you're still getting your data governance in place. Or maybe, just maybe, there are some SharePoint sites that you never want Copilot to touch. In that case, restricted content discovery is perfect. So let's have a look at restricted content discovery. It's really easy to switch on. Okay, this is an easy one. We're back in our SharePoint Admin Center, and I've got a SharePoint site here. We simply go to Settings, and you can see here, look, restrict content from Microsoft 365 Copilot. If you switch this on, content will be restricted from appearing in Microsoft 365 Copilot. Now simply switch that on and save it. And again, as I've discussed, there might be some sites that you never want Copilot to troll through. This is an ideal setting. So there you have it. There's my 9 tips. Now, before I go, I just want to loop back and thank today's video sponsor again, who is Orchestra. Now, we've gone through how important it is to get your data in order before you even consider rolling out Copilot. You can see that you've got all the tools available in Microsoft 365, but it's not exactly easy. We've got different portals. We've got to run PowerShell scripts. It's a bit of a nightmare. Fortunately, if you use a tool like Orchestra, it does all the heavy lifting for us. I would highly recommend it. If you want to know more, there's a link in the description. Thanks again for watching today's video. Look forward to seeing you again soon.